What's up guys, today we're going to be looking at the Marvel Legends Haslab Sentinel. I'm filming this from my living room because this box is so huge that it cannot fit into my usual setup. Also shout out to my friend Roger who's lending me this for the video. So the Haslab Sentinel comes in a brown shipper box and we're going to open it to have a look at what's inside. Looking at the artwork on the box, we see Master Mole and Bastion facing off with Wolverine. On the top of the box, we have the rebranded X-Men logo. Down to the sides, Magneto's facing off with Omega Sentinel, and there's also Professor X at the bottom. Onto the reverse side of the box, we have a regular Sentinel facing off with Cyclops and Marvel Gold. On the bottom of the box, we also have some product information. And finally, to the left side, we have a couple of Sentinels blasting off together with the female Sentinel Prime. So let's go ahead and get this box open. And out of the box, he comes in styrofoam packaging with a sheet of plastic in the front. The Sentinel's laid out over here with a couple of interchangeable heads, mechanical tentacles, an interchangeable damaged hand, Bastion, and the female Sentinel Prime. Bastion himself also comes with an interchangeable head. Looking at the interchangeable head, it's actually cast in a flat pink plastic, as you can see on the inside of the head, but then on the outside it's given that shiny metallic finish, so that's a very nice touch. The face is a pale flesh tone plastic insert, and the expression is rather neutral, slightly sinister, and there's also pink paint for the eyes. And as with all Sentinel designs, there is mechanical detail down the top of the head as well as the sides on the ears, and some lines on the top and the back. The spare head pops on nicely onto Bastion's body, and it also fits on the female Prime Sentinel's body, but that just looks weird. Taking a closer look at Bastion, he's on the medium built Marvel Legends body that we've seen on Magneto as well as Cosmic Spider-Man. His only new parts are his head sculpt as well as his torso. His face sculpt is pretty cool. He's got a quiet, sinister expression on his face with the furrowed brows, pink for his eyes, a subtle dark shading around his eyes as well. He's given black paint for his mouth on his lips, and he's got a mechanical lower jaw. Most of his face is cast in a very pale flesh tone. Super cool mechanical detail printed on the inside of his cheeks. And that print is super sharp and matches the mechanical detail down his neck as well. On the top of his head, he's got hair that's cast in a cream color, and that's given a white dry brush treatment to bring out the texture. That same treatment is also given to the beard on his chin. That same dry brush effect bringing out the texture in his beard. Onto his neck is cast in a metallic looking plastic with gold applications down the front, as well as some shading detail on the top of his neck. And that shading also extends all the way down to the back of the neck, bringing out that nice mechanical detail. On the top of his torso, he's got a bright metallic pink chest piece with red paint applications on the middle. The rest of his torso as well as his arms and his legs are cast in a dark grey, almost black plastic. And there's also interesting sculpted detail down the side of his torso. That detail is also painted in gold. Rest of his body also has defined muscle sculpting, and that's all just in that plain dark grey plastic. For articulation, his head is on a ball hinge, so that goes right as well as left. He can also tilt sideways just a little bit, looking down just that much, and that's hindered by his beard, and also looking up pretty well. Ball hinge at the shoulders, so that goes 360, as well as going out that far. He's got a bicep swivel, so that goes 360. Double jointed elbows, very good range. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360, articulating inwards as well as outwards. He's got a mid-torso hinge, so he crunches forward as well as backward. Swivel at the waist for 360. Ball joints at the hips, so they go out, not that much, as well as forward and backward. Upper thigh swivel, so that goes 360. Double joint the knees, so that's quite good range, more than 90 degrees. Calf swivel, so that goes 360. Ankle tilt downwards as well as upwards. And ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. For the female Prime Sentinel, she appears to be using the same Marvel Legends female body at first, but upon closer inspection you will notice that she's made from different parts. The only reused part is probably just her lower torso. She's got a rather neutral head sculpt, but that also brings out the soullessness of the Sentinels. That head is cast in a pale flash tone plastic, with metallic pink paint for the frame around her face, black paint for her eyebrows as well as her eyeliner, with pink for her eyes, as well as a darker red lipstick. Her hair is cast in a cream colored plastic, and that's given some blonde dry brushing to bring out the texture in that hair sculpt. That is also sculpted floating in the wind. There's also nice mechanical detail like we've seen on Bastion, and that's on her neck, cast in the metallic looking plastic, as well as a metallic pink color on her upper torso, and that matches the metallic pink frame around her face nicely. This color goes all the way around the back. Onto the rest of her body, it's cast in that same dark gray, almost black plastic, comparing the rest of her body to that standard Marvel Legends female body buck. The lower torso is the same. Her arms are more muscular, with some sacrifice of sculpting at the elbow joint. You can clearly see how that elbow peg extends into her bicep, but that slight sacrifice in sculpting actually gives her more range in her elbow well past 90 degrees. I find it a strange choice to give her gripping hands instead of fists, because she doesn't really come with any accessories to hold on to. And onto her legs, likewise, she's also got a more muscular sculpt, so her legs appear more curvy and more filled out. Strangely, she ends up having smaller feet compared to the regular Marvel Legends female body. For articulation, her head's on a ball hinge, so that swings left as well as right, and there's some tilt right as well as left, really subtle. She's able to look down that far as well as up quite a fair bit. Swivel hinge at the shoulders, so that goes 360 as well as going out that far. Swivel just above her elbow, so that goes 360, and there's also a single jointed elbow that we've seen can go past 90 degrees. Swivel hinge at the wrist, so that goes 360 as well as articulating in as well as out. Ball joint at the middle of her torso, so she goes 360. She can also tilt sideways to the right as well as the left, and there's also ab crunch forward just a little bit as well as backward. Ball joints at the hips, so they go out. They also go forward and backward. Swivel at the thighs, so that goes 360. Double jointed knees, very good range. Ankle tilt downwards as well as upwards. And finally ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. Bastion and the female Prime Sentinel are on Marvel Legends standard articulation, so you should be able to get them into many different poses. Size-wise, Bastion stands at just under 6.5 inches or just under 16.5 centimeters, while the female Prime Sentinel stands at just under 6.25 inches or about 15.5 centimeters. For size comparisons, here they are with other Sentinels, as well as a few different versions of X-Men. For the Sentinel's accessories, we're looking at the interchangeable destroyed hand. Most of this is cast in a metallic looking purple plastic, and then that purple plastic is given that coat of metallic purple paint, so the finish really looks good under the light. In the middle of the hand we see a repulsor, and that's also shattered in the middle, revealing some metallic detail on the inside. The metallic detail looks like to be a separate metallic plastic piece inserted. Moving on to the damaged fingers, there's metallic gray paint for the joints, and where the fingers break off you can see cables exposed, mangled metal, so that's really a nice touch. On the sides there's also silver paint for the joints. Overall a very detailed piece for a damaged hand. On the outside we also see some vent detail over here. Onto the joint itself, it is cast in a gray plastic with sculpting detail for the cables that run all the way into that wrist. And the articulation over here, you're able to move that hand inwards as well as outwards, and there's ratchets in that joint. Next up is the battle damaged hit. It is cast in a pink plastic once you take a look on the inside. There's also cool sculpting detail even on the insides of the hit. For all those cables that go in, swinging back to the outside, it's given that metallic finish once again, covered in paint all over the hit. At the top, we see the sheet metal being torn off his hit, revealing some grey mechanical detail and mangled cables once again. He's got a bashed left eye, and that's also given some weathering. His faceplate is a pale plastic that's not painted, but given nice touches with all that weathering, as well as the silver over here for the dents in his cheek. The top of his head also has dings and dents, given some nice weathering at some parts, as well as the silver for those scratches over here and the front. But strangely, that silver is omitted on some parts of the dents. So Hasbro should have been more consistent with applying that silver for all the scratches across the head. His jaw is also torn off, revealing more cables. Nice hit of yellow over here for a stray cable. That mouthpiece is also mangled, and I really like how the broken parts of that mouthpiece are sticking out. The vent over here particularly, as well as the broken front of the mouth. On the right side, he also has some red paint over here for a cable. And moving around the rest of the head, we see a sleek, smooth sculpt with enough mechanical detail. And of course, there's also black paint in between the lines of that crown. And before we even fit all these battle damage parts onto the Sentinel figure, I just want to say, these parts are actually made for great diorama additions when you're taking photos of your action figures. Now we're taking a look at the multi-Sentinel head. On the inside it's got a grey insert, while on the outside it's a pink plastic. The grey inserts are probably for the detail for the eyes as well as the mouth. And then the outer shell of it is that pink plastic, once again given that metallic sheen. The first face is painted in gold, with gold accents for the mouthpiece as well. Next up is another gold face. This gold has more yellow than the previous gold face, and it has 3 glowing elements in its mouth. Paint on the glow is a really nice gradient from red to white, so it makes it look like it's lit up. And onto that last face, it is painted in silver, just some cable detail in the mouth, and overall this face looks the most plain out of the 3 faces. And the last interchangeable head sculpt is the Master Mold head. Once again, it is also cast in that pink plastic, also having that same cable detail on the inside of the head. And on the outside, that whole helmet is given that shiny pink metallic paint once again for a premium finish. The top of the helmet, we see purple plastic inserts. This is great detailing, and it's got a metallic purple finish painted on. There are also 2 silver orbs on the top of the head. The purple elements also stretch all the way down to the back and come back all the way right to the front. There's a silver painted plastic insert at the front of his forehead, with also some red paint inside. Moving on to his face, he looks stern and cold. Very uniformly applied silver paint all over it with no bubbling, so that paint really looks awesome on his face. Moving to the sides of his helmet, he's also got that 2 similar looking silver orbs, and this is pretty much the biggest and heaviest alternate head sculpt. And finally on his chin, he's also got that silver and red paint to match that design element on the top of his forehead. So this is the biggest and heaviest alternate head sculpt for the Sentinel. And also finally, he comes with 2 mechanical tentacles. These will plug into the holes on his palms. These tentacles are flexible and posable, so you can use them to grab some X-Men. The tentacle is cast in a flexible grey plastic, and it's got ribbed detail on it all the way up the tentacle. The cross section of the tentacle is strange because there is 1 curved side as well as 3 sharp corners. And before we fit on all the accessories, I just want to show you how to install the batteries onto the Sentinel. First, you need to remove this back plate off. Remove that screw on this panel. Install 2 AAA batteries. Replace both back panels onto the Sentinel. And now activating that pink power button on his chest, you can turn on a couple of lights. And those lights will change colors from white to the yellow and into the oranges as well as reds, as well as greens. Popping the Sentinel head off, the light source is actually from 2 LEDs on the inside of the head. The LEDs also work well with the battle damage head. Obviously the damaged eye has no light coming through. This is what the multi-sentinel head looks like on the figure with the LEDs also working, and it also looks really cool. And finally, this is what he looks like with the master mold head. And at the end of the light up, you can notice the lights flickering off and fading, so that's also a rather cool effect. And I also want to point out that you can engage another different mode of light up by holding that power source, and you can see all his eyes and his power source start flashing and changing colors. So that's a really fun feature as well. And of course, here he is with the battle damaged right hand, as well as the tentacle grabbing Wolverine. Even though the tentacle is made of flexible plastic, it doesn't necessarily grab around 6-inch figures that well, and that's probably due to the plastic not being flexible enough. So first impression of the Sentinel right out of the box is that it just looks like a premium collectible, simply because of its sheer size and massive shelf presence, and also because every single metallic looking panel that you see on the Sentinel is beautifully painted in shiny metallic paint. And that includes all the pinks and purples on the figure. We've already taken a look at the head sculpt on the battle damaged version, so the undamaged version actually looks more complete, with the rest of his lower jaw and his chin intact. And this actually makes me realize that this is an internal joint of the Sentinel's jaw. Once again, we see a lot of paint applications on his head, the black in between the design elements on his forehead, the yellow on the left side of his cheek, as well as the red on the right side, silver paint for the mouthpiece, and also an inserted metallic looking plastic over here on his chin. His torso is big and bulky, and it's made of that metallic looking purple plastic, sleek, smooth design, separate metallic looking plastic inserts for the shoulder joints. The power source in the middle of his chest is using a transparent plastic with some translucent pink on the inside, and that all catches the light really well once that LED changes color on the inside. I'm particularly impressed with the sculpting work on his abdomen area. Very nice smooth metallic design for his abs, and then more amazing sculpting for the grey plastic on the sides. You see cables of different sizes, a large one near the front of his abdomen, and then smaller ones on the sides. We also have some small hits of paint. There's a bit of red over here as well as yellow. On his right side you see blue paint as well as yellow paint over here. So all these small hits of paint breaks up the monotony of the grey on the sides. And that grey is once again also accented by the repeated use of metallic pink paint over here. So I really like that three-tone contrast all the way down the sides of his torso. His crotch piece is a floating piece of flexible, soft plastic that's cast in purple and also painted that metallic, shiny purple paint. Onto his arm, once again, great work on that shoulder pad. It is actually keyed into that joint in his shoulder, so that shoulder pad moves together with the arm without much hindrance to articulation, swinging forward and backward. The inside of the shoulder is a dull grey plastic with no paint, but that's well covered by that shoulder pad. Moving on to his bicep, it's once again that pink metallic paint with some metallic grey over here on the side of the bicep. Cool, sleek, sculpted detail down the front of the bicep. Once again, a metallic paint over here. And then they also added more detail into the joint design. The outside of the lower arm also has a sleek purple metallic paint. Panel detail for the armor down the outside of the forearm, as well as a separate wrist guard over here. And that's also got metallic paint for the vents over here. The outside of the hand also has vents over here, just like the battle damaged hand. And we see the same metallic plastic used as the joints in the fingers. All these joints actually work. Looking at the inside of his arm, again another nice touch of that orange paint for a cable on the inside of his shoulder joint. There's a little bit of paint scuffing over here, so I suppose that's a warning sign to treat your figure with care. For a figure that's entirely painted, it's almost certain that you will see some scuffs as you use it. The tricep piece also appears to be a separate piece that's assembled. Once again, that also lends us an appreciation of all the parts counts in this figure. There's also mechanical detail for the elbow joint over here, as well as a smooth armor plate for the inside of the forearm. Now we get down to his hands, and that's where it's really mind-boggling. So first of all, there's a repulsor in the middle of his palm with the hole that you peg the tentacle into. But the articulation and the sculpting of the fingers is where it's really impressive. Hasbro has treated the hands with extreme care, so you can see that there are unique sculpts for the thumb, the index finger as well as the middle finger. The ring finger is probably the same sculpt as an index finger, and every one of them is assembled from so many parts because there are joints and they are articulated all the way in the segments of a realistic human hand, and that is what is really impressive. Now we move to the back of his torso. We can see that backing plate that we removed to insert the batteries. This backing plate is also really nicely designed with different panels put together. There are gray inserts over here for the thrusters, and I suppose these will enable flight for the Sentinel. There's also vents over here on the bottom side of his upper torso. And moving down over here, the detail is just as nice as the front. The mechanical design over here kind of resembles the spinal cord. And there is also nice hits of yellow, orange and blue paint down the sides to break up the monotony of all these cables. And now taking a look at his legs. At the hip area you will see more of the grey plastic, and that's also once again given some nice paint applications to highlight some colors in the cables. Moving down his thighs, there are some nice paneling detail on the inside of the thighs. On the outside it is just a smooth, sleek armor design. Couple of interesting details like all the vents over here just above the knee, as well as once again nice joint detail for the knees. Down to his lower legs, also that sleek, smooth design. That's also given a couple of interesting details like that panel lining over here, as well as the vents on the front, as well as the back side of the lower leg. There's also an ankle guard that's a separate piece and assembled, and that would also move as you articulate the ankle joint. And lowering that guard, you will see some grey mechanical detail on the inside of that ankle as well. His feet are also nicely sculpted, but they do appear to be identical on the left and right side. And swinging over to look at his legs and his feet from the back. Once again, also smooth panels down the lower legs, as well as interesting sculpted detail for the sides of the feet. The bottom of his feet are also intricately sculpted, really nice details for a couple of panels, as well as some pistons down the side of his feet. What's really impressive is that there are also 2 thrusters per foot, and each thruster is painted with that sort of gradient once again, white in the middle onto the yellow on the outside, and that really gives a nice effect for the thrusters glowing and firing. For articulation, his head is on a ball joint, while the bottom of the neck also has a swivel. So this head has some tilt, nothing sideways, but it can tilt up just a little bit and not much at all downwards. That head can also go 360 on that ball joint. Because the light source in his head only points forward, you need to use that swivel at the bottom of his neck in order to make sure that the light source turns with the head. And you can use that light up function in the direction that you desire. He's got a swivel hinge at the shoulder, but before I show that off, you have to take care to make sure that this shoulder pad doesn't get jammed behind this sharp corner on his torso, and that might lead to some paint scuffing. So make sure that the shoulder pad sits outside, and then you can swivel that arm forward as well as backward. And that arm also goes outward that far. He has a bicep swivel, so that swivels outwards as well as inwards. He's got a double hinged elbows, but that gets you just about 90 degrees because of the bulky armor plates. He's got a swivel hinge at the wrist, so you can swing his wrist outwards as well as inwards and articulate it outwards as well as inwards. And you can feel a ratchet in that joint as well. Now onto the fingers, and this is where it is really impressive. There's a hinge over here so you can hinge that thumb on its base. A swivel at the base of the thumb so that swings in and out. There are 2 hinges over here on the thumb so you can swing that thumb inwards on the lower hinge as well as curl the rest of it on the upper hinge. There's a similar amount of articulation in the rest of the fingers, starting with the swivel at the bottom so you can swing the fingers in and out, and then curl them up using the 3 consecutive hinges. So that way it looks really good, just curled up inwards, looking really natural. So you can make all sorts of hand gestures, rocking out and maybe even making some gang signs, so that's really up to you. And ultimately, even in a fist, it looks great. I also should mention that the hinges in all the fingers are ratcheted, so they can get a pretty good grip on a medium-sized Marvel Legends figure. But it's not possible to grab a larger figure like Colossus around his arms as well as his torso. So you can only grab a body part of Colossus like his torso or his legs. Moving on to his torso, he's got a ball joint at the upper part of the torso. It's really tight, but you can tilt him sideways to the right as well as the left. There is also some forward ab crunch, as well as some backward bend. There is also rotation in that ball joint, but it is really hard to rotate. And you will end up having to shimmy that ball joint just forward and backward in order to get him to rotate sideways. Next up, he also has a lower torso hinge, and this is so well disguised because of the sculpting of the cables on the sides. You only really see where that hinge kind of splits once you look really closely. And that hinge is also ratcheted so you can get him to bend forward just one click, and there's also one backward click. He's got a swivel hinge at the hips, so they go out pretty far once you tuck those metallic pink panels under that floating crotch piece. The hips also go forward and backward that far, once again also hindered by that purple crotch piece. He's also got an upper thigh swivel, and once you swivel it out, you can see even more of those cable detail on the inside of his thigh. And he's got double jointed knees that get you just past 90 degrees. That's pretty good for a big chunky guy. However, these knees are really super loose and they just drop by themselves, so I'll talk about them a little more later on. And finally, down to his lower legs, he does have a swivel just above his ankles, so you can swivel his feet outwards as well as inwards, and that's mostly limited by that ankle guard. There's no ankle tilt upwards, but there is some ankle tilt downwards. And you can also get some ankle pivot inwards as well as outwards. Just really minimal because that's hindered by that ankle guard. Now before I attempt to fix his knees, I just want to say a couple of things about this figure. For an action figure, I look for three things. First would be the look of the figure. Second would be the function. And third would be the feel. In the looks department, this is definitely a premium figure. The sculpting all the way in this entire figure is fantastic. From the multiple head sculpts, a really sleek and bulky chest, as well as all that detail in his lower torso and his hands. That is just simply amazing. The paintwork from head to toe is also fantastic. I really like how all that metallic paint just screams out to you and brings out that shelf presence on this Sentinel. Now on to my second point about function. I love that he's got plenty of accessories. He comes with two extra action figures, which is Bastion and the female Prime Sentinel. He's got a total of 3 swappable heads and 1 battle damage hand, and those heads can be used for diorama purposes. For the function of this figure, I also like that his electronics work spectacularly. I like how they change colors and they also have different lighting modes. The articulation on this figure is mostly impressive when you look at the upper torso, especially in the hands, and that's where I get really blown away. But once you get to the lower, those weak knees really just kill all that functionality. And lastly, despite all that articulation given in his ankles, there really is very limited range for you to move around, especially that they cannot tilt upwards, so he cannot get into deep stances. And lastly, I come to the third and last factor, which is the feel of the figure. I have not actually taken apart and weighed the individual parts of the figure, but the weight distribution is horrible. The weight seems to be concentrated in the arms, the lower torso, and the upper legs. In particular, the lower legs and the feet are all hollow. To get better stability, you're really going to need a center of mass that is as close to the middle of the figure and get it as low as possible. What's happening here is the arms are pushing the center of mass outward and upward, while the lower legs and the feet contribute so little to that mass. So the figure is already big and heavy as you play with it, and it's just really unwieldy and difficult to handle. So now, thanks to the whoosh, I'm gonna try to tighten the knees using these screws. First of all, you need a flathead screwdriver in order to pry and pop these covers off. Next, you will need to use a Phillips head screwdriver in order to tighten these 2 screws over here. So over here, I've gone ahead and tightened those screws in the joints. And I've also used an engineering testing technique known as marking torque. Basically, this is just to mark a straight line across the joint as well as the screw. And while playing with the figure, if that knee joint loosens with the screw kind of getting undone, It will be obvious when this line is not straight anymore across the joint because that screw has basically broken that straight line. So now with those knees tightened, you can see that they hold up as compared to the other leg which is not tightened. So I went and bent that knee through its full range of articulation for about 40 times. And for now, as you can see, it still holds its own weight compared to the other leg. However, now upon closer inspection, you can see that the screw has kind of traveled a little bit. So this marking torque line is no longer straight through the joint. The Fush video did mention that tightening the screw was only a temporary solution. So now I'm gonna attempt to make that solution permanent. So I remove the screw from the joint and I'm gonna apply some super glue along the threads. The super glue will act as a thread locker and that screw should stay in its place as you continue bending the knees. And right now I've already applied super glue to the threads of that screw and fasten it back in so that the marking torque line is once again straight through the joint across the screw. I'm just gonna let that super glue cure for the next couple of hours. So I let the glue on the screws cure for a couple of hours. And now I'm just going to do some accelerated testing and bend that knee joint for 40 times and see if it still holds up. Taking a closer look at those screws and you can see that they have not traveled after 40 bends. I did the same process of bending the right knee 40 times as well, and having a closer look at those screws, they also have not traveled. So here's a quick test to see if the Sentinel can hold his knees up, and it seems like he does with just a little gradual sag. So here's the full result of the knee repair. You can see that he can now hold up his legs weight just fine. And he also doesn't tip over so easily anymore. With his improved knees, you can probably get him into wider stances. Definitely better than compared to his original knees. He's pretty near impossible to pose just standing on one foot. And I definitely do not recommend you leaving him in a wide stance while on display. But he should be able to pull off most basic neutral poses, and it should also be safe enough to leave him standing like this with the improved knees without fear of a shelf dive. Size-wise, with his regular head, he stands at about 26.5 inches or about 67 centimeters. And with the Master Mold head, he goes up to 27.5 inches or about 70 centimeters. Of course, he towers over the previous Toy Biz and Hasbro Sentinels. And for size comparisons, here he is with the regular X-Men, the Sentinel characters, as well as a couple of House of X X-Men. In summary, this figure hits all the right notes as purely a premium looking figure. In terms of function, it's still a 50-50 for me, if you can repair the knees and hopefully they hold up over time. But in terms of feel, this figure doesn't feel like a premium build because of the poor weight distribution and ends up being really hard to handle and pose. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe to my channel for more toy reviews. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.